We picture them standing tall at the edge of a fjord, sword in hand, eyes set on Valhalla. The Vikings, warriors who lived and died by the old gods, who feared nothing, not even death itself. Their burials were supposed to be grand, pagan spectacles, ship burials, weapons, sacrifice, a one-way ticket to the halls of Odin. But what if I told you that beneath the surface of these legendary rituals, something else was quietly taking root, something that doesn't quite fit the image we've been sold? What if Viking burials were more Christian than we ever imagined? Let's rewind. It's the 9th century. Christianity is spreading across Europe like wildfire, and the Vikings, those infamous raiders of monasteries, are right in the middle of it all. They're not just taking gold and silver from Christian lands. They're taking ideas. They're watching. They're listening. And slowly, without anyone really noticing, those ideas start to seep into their world. Not in grand declarations or sudden conversions, but in the quiet details, in the way they bury their dead. For centuries, archaeologists have uncovered Viking graves that seem to tell a clear story. A warrior buried with his sword and shield. A woman laid to rest with her jewelry and household items. Sometimes, a ship to carry them to the afterlife. These were pagan burials, right? Rituals meant to honor the old gods and prepare the deceased for a journey to another realm. That's what we thought. That's what made sense. But then researchers started noticing something strange. Small crosses tucked into graves, bodies oriented east to west, the Christian way, not the traditional Norse north to south. Grave goods that seemed oddly restrained for a culture known for its extravagance in death. The more we looked, the more the lines began to blur. Take the famous Oseberg ship burial in Norway. 2 women, richly adorned, buried in a magnificent vessel with everything they could possibly need in the afterlife. Textiles, carts, even animals. It screams Viking tradition. But when you look closer, there's something unusual. The grave was built with care, yes, but also with ambiguity. No clear religious symbols. No definitive markers of pagan belief. Some scholars now believe that one of the women may have been Christian, or at least influenced by Christian practices. The burial honors tradition, but it also leaves room for something new, something changing. This wasn't unique to Oseberg. Across Scandinavia, archaeologists have found graves that straddle 2 worlds. In some cases, the dead were buried with both Thor's hammers and Christian crosses. In others, the positioning of the body, the absence of weapons, the simplicity of the grave, all pointed toward Christian influence, even if no cross was present. It's as if the Vikings were experimenting, testing the waters of a new belief system without fully letting go of the old one. They weren't abandoning their gods. They were hedging their bets. But why? Why would a culture so deeply rooted in Norse mythology start adopting the burial practices of a foreign religion? The answer is more practical than you might think. Christianity wasn't just a faith. It was a political tool, a way to build alliances, secure trade routes, and gain legitimacy in a rapidly Christianizing Europe. Viking leaders who converted, or even pretended to convert, could negotiate with Christian kings as equals. They could marry into royal families. They could access markets that were otherwise closed to pagans. And when those leaders died, their burials reflected this new reality. They needed to appeal to both their Norse followers and their Christian allies. So they created funerals that did both. There's a famous account from the Arab traveler Ahmad ibn Fadlan, who witnessed a Viking funeral along the Volga River in the early 10th century. It's one of the most detailed descriptions we have, and it's brutal. A chieftain is burned on a ship, along with a slave girl who was sacrificed to accompany him. It's the kind of spectacle that defines our image of Viking death rituals. But here's the thing. Ibn Fadlan was writing about a very specific group of Vikings, far from Scandinavia, at a time when Christianity had barely touched that region. Back home, things were already starting to look different. By the time his account was written, many Vikings in Norway, Denmark, and Sweden were already experimenting with Christian burials. The grand, violent rituals were becoming the exception, not the rule. And then there's the evidence we find in the graves themselves. Christian missionaries didn't just preach in Scandinavia. They built churches. They baptized kings. They trained local priests. and they influenced how people thought about death. In Christian belief, the body was sacred. It needed to be treated with respect, buried in consecrated ground, oriented toward the rising sun to symbolize resurrection. These practices started appearing in Viking graves, sometimes subtly, sometimes not. A grave aligned east to west, a body without weapons, a simple wooden coffin instead of a grand ship. These weren't just aesthetic choices, they were theological statements. But here's where it gets really interesting. The Vikings didn't just adopt Christian burial practices because they were told to. They adapted them. They made them their own. In some graves, you'll find a cross, but it's carved in a distinctly Norse style. In others, the body is oriented east to west, but it's surrounded by traditional grave goods. The Vikings weren't replacing their beliefs. They were blending them, creating something hybrid, something that allowed them to honor their ancestors while embracing a new worldview. It was a cultural negotiation played out in the grave. This blending wasn't always peaceful. There were tensions, families divided over faith, communities torn between the old ways and the new. Some Vikings clung fiercely to their pagan traditions, even as Christianity spread around them. Others embraced the new religion wholeheartedly, seeing it as the future. And many, perhaps most, existed somewhere in between. They attended Christian services but still told stories of Odin and Thor. They buried their dead with crosses, but also with swords. They lived in a world that was no longer fully pagan, but not yet fully Christian. By the 11th century, the transformation was nearly complete. Scandinavia was officially Christian. Churches dotted the landscape. Monasteries were built. The old gods were fading into legend, but the graves tell a more nuanced story. Even in this Christianized world, traces of the old beliefs lingered. A Thor's hammer pendant hidden beneath a Christian tunic, a ship-shaped stone grave marker, a burial mound that echoed ancient traditions. The Vikings hadn't abandoned their past. They'd woven it into their present. So were Viking burials more Christian than we think? The answer isn't simple. It's not a clean yes or no. It's a story of transformation, of cultures colliding and merging, of people caught between worlds, trying to honor their heritage while embracing a new identity. The Vikings didn't wake up one day and decide to become Christian. It happened slowly, grave by grave, generation by generation. And in those graves, we can see the evidence, not of a sudden conversion, but of a gradual, messy, deeply human process of change. The next time you picture a Viking funeral, don't just see the flames and the longships. See the crosses hidden in the shadows. See the bodies laid to rest facing east. See the quiet compromises and the silent revolutions happening beneath the surface. Because the Vikings weren't just warriors and raiders. They were people navigating a world in flux. And their burials tell that story better than any saga ever could.